Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another edition of Flashpoint, a television program of issues and ideas. Flashpoint is brought to you by the Lawrence Debate Union, which, in case you didn't know, is an endowed co-curricular activity at the University of Vermont that promotes debating in many different forms, trains University of Vermont students in a number of those forms, and then competes nationally, internationally, and hopefully at some point spatially as well. It's one of the other things that the Lawrence Debate Union does to try to promote discussion and discourse in our community is to bring you Flashpoint. And are we determined? Yes, we are. Up now in the 350s, Flashpoint grinds forward. My name is Alfred C. Snider. I'm the Edwin W. Lawrence Professor of Forensics at the University of Vermont. And I have good news for you because Flashpoint is now available for on-demand viewing. Just go to our website, debate.uvm.edu, click on the Flashpoint icon, and you will find yourself confronted with a vast panoply of Flashpoint programs that you can watch whenever you want. But we're also live 3 times a week here on Burlington's Channel 15, Vermont Community Access Media. We love you. Well, this week I'm joined by 2 panelists from the Lawrence Debate Union, 2 people with substantial Flashpoint experience. On my right, I have Sam Ricker, who's getting up there now and having been on a number of shows. And what do you think you're going to do? What will you be doing 10 years from now?
I would like to have a house, and I would like to have a job. What those are is, that's just
all right.
stuff.
So, if you have real estate or a job, check out Sam during this show. On my left, I have Taylor Lalemand, who's a senior at the University of Vermont. What do you think you'll be doing 10 years from now?
Well, hopefully I'll lock down some of the employment that Sam's looking for. Currently looking for a job. But I hope to be working in the field of policy.
Okay.
See where we go.
Right, and I trust that both of you are going to make a difference in the world, because otherwise, why bother, right? Well, here we are, Flashpoint show number 356. Vladimir Putin has been named as Time Magazine's Person of the Year. We believe that, women are people too. So we're going to say Person of the Year, and we find that to be an interesting choice. And so on this program, we're going to talk about Vladimir Putin, why he may or may not be Person of the Year, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether he's good for Russia or the world or himself or bad, and we'll try to evaluate him because he's obviously a very important guy. Let's talk about, what does it mean to be Person of the Year? Does that mean it's a good thing, or what does it mean?
Well, Time Magazine says it's not so much of an honor, but I'm paraphrasing here, but they do say that it's an accurate reflection of who is influencing our world. It doesn't always have to be good.
Yeah, Adolf Hitler was Person of the Year once.
Yeah, I think if you look at the past candidates for this position, you can definitely see that they're more about the influential qualities and less about whether or not they were necessarily good for our country or for
world.
our world.
Yeah. Some of them were quite good, some bad.
Particularly Nixon and other of our contributions to this global list.
George Bush.
Yeah. Are questionable, I think, today.
But then some people who I view as heroes have been Person of the Year.
As well.
Nelson Mandela would be a really good example, although Mandela, I believe, shared it with F.W. de Klerk, who's not one of my favorite people, and Henry Kissinger was even once Person of the Year. So I guess it means you're important. So it doesn't matter if Vladimir Putin is good or bad, it's just, is he important? That's the standard for Time Magazine.
Right, so really...
Of course, that's not the standard for whether we appreciate him or not, but now, who else is in the running for this?
This year we had J.K. Rowling, and David Petraeus was number 4th in the running, and Time took quite a large amount of their article to talk about how Petraeus was very influential this year, and just miss this war.
And John McCain has said that he would have picked Petraeus. I probably would have picked Petraeus over J.K. Rowling, I don't know. But I understand Al Gore was number 2 for the Inconvenient Truth movie and some other kind of stuff. So an interesting group of people, but Vladimir Putin wins. Well, who is Vladimir Putin? Well, he's the leader of Russia. This is from the Reuters News Service Fact Box. Putin was born in October 1952. That means he's younger than I am. In St. Petersburg, then called Leningrad, a former KGB spy in East Germany. He rose to head the KGB's successor organization, the FSB, before being chosen as prime minister by the late President Boris Yeltsin in August 1999. He took over as acting president when Yeltsin stepped down, kind of in a drunken stupor, in December 1999, after a huge public relations campaign to build a profile for him since he was relatively unknown. He was elected president in March 2000, and he steadily concentrated power in the Kremlin, in Moscow, and in himself, and now has recently announced that he's not going to run for president again because there are term limits. He's not supposed to. But he's going to become prime minister, and then his flunky is going to be president. So basically, he'll still be calling the shots.
Certainly. And so far, he's really contributed a lot to their economy with their natural gas and oil revenues in 2006, really aiding their GDP increase. As of 2006, it was 6.7% growth rate, which is almost frightening, really. But they're still one of the smallest G8 countries. So Putin is definitely dreaming big here and on the path to success for Russia, I think.
And he's used, most of that's been based on oil and gas revenues.
Definitely, which is a volatile source of income at this point.
Right, and because the price has gone up so much, that's benefited him quite a bit. And it's kind of a false prosperity, because it's not that the Russian economy overall is doing so well, it's that there's a lot of money being pumped in from China, from Europe, from other countries who need oil and gas, and then that's sort of fueling the economy. I understand there's a huge amount of imports that are brought into Russia because they don't really manufacture stuff on their own. So it's kind of a false economic growth.
That's very accurate, Tuna. There's a huge elasticity of demand in energy resources right now. So economically, it's a huge factor.
Does that mean that it's been that the benefits have been widely shared by the Russian population, or?
There's a huge discrepancy in wealth still in the society, and it's causing a lot of trouble between the rich, wealthy Russians and the working class and poverty-stricken communities there.
And also there's apparently quite a urban-rural divide.
Right.
As well, that the rural areas are. And also a big geographic discrepancy, because apparently under the Soviet times, everybody who lived out in Siberia was really subsidized really heavily. They got extra money, extra income, and that's all stopped now. So a lot of people have left, a lot of towns have become abandoned. People who are there have little or no government services, so it's kind of an interesting, and overall it looks pretty good. And I understand Moscow has now become the most expensive city to visit as a tourist.
That's really interesting, because just today there was an article in BBC about Moscow having declared that they would use preventative nuclear weapons, just in the way that they'd have no plans.
Taylor, what is a preventive nuclear weapon?
Yeah, no, they did not
didn't specify.
delineate their plan of attack or their plan for using these preventative nuclear measures, but they said they would defend themselves. So that is a little worrying on the front of diplomatic relations for us.
So maybe you don't want to be, maybe it's not such a good tourist spot after all. And of a lot of people have, many countries have built themselves up through oil and gas revenues. I can think of Persian Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc., have built themselves up quite a bit through oil and gas. Do you think the Russians can do the same?
Well, Russia's got vast other natural resources as well. It's got most of the world's timber, and it's got a whole bunch of other resources that could be exploited if the oil and the gas is not such a stable basis for their economy.
So their extraction industries are pretty pretty vast. What are the implications of? Because I mean, when you have a product that people need and must have, there are some security implications as well. If Russia is a major supplier of oil and gas, are there security implications of that?
I think that's a really good point to make, just because in 2006 there was 70% going directly to the EU from Russia. That's a huge trading partner. That means the security of the EU, as far as their energy goes, rests with Russia and their close relations. So it really does strain the relations globally, and we've been led to believe that resource wars are something to think about in the future.
And maybe not just a war, but if you don't do what we want, we're turning off the tap.
I mean, what are we doing right now?
Yeah, right.
What are we
right
doing
now?
right
I'm
now
sorry,
in the
excuse
Middle
me.
East?
But I'm not sure anybody's likely to go to war with Russia right away
Certainly not.
to take away their oil. But
No.
but you never can tell. If Europe is so dependent on Russian oil and gas, that could make things tough. Is there any indication that the Russians are willing to use this leverage to get what they want?
You know, it sounds like they're pretty secure in their plans as of yet, and they don't seem to be changing their policies in any way, and if anything, defending their policies and even threatening a little.
However, rich EU countries are doing okay, but other countries are not. For example, the Ukraine and Belarus have faced, threats of energy cuts or huge price rises, and they're really dependent on Russian oil and gas. So that's been something, if you're a small country, you can be really taken advantage of about this. Okay, now, Putin has promised to crush, in the presidential election of 2000, he promised to crush the rebellion in Chechnya. And I guess he's done that, but it's been fairly brutal and not without damage. For example, the hostage incident that took place in Moscow, where hundreds of people were gassed and killed, and stuff like that. One of the other things is that he's a big fan of Serbia, and Serbia has this breakaway province called Kosovo, and he keeps arguing in favor of don't let Kosovo go. And one of the things he said is that if the UN forces Serbia to give up Kosovo and make it independent, then he can force Georgia to give up various provinces, and because there are pockets of Russians living in these other countries surrounding Russia, so he could do that. So it seems like he's got it going either way there. What about the human rights situation in Russia? Didn't they have elections?
Well, his strict authoritarian rule has only, as you said before, Tuna, generated more and more strict control over their government. It says here in U.S. News that, or actually it was the Times, that a strictly democratic election is near impossible in Russia. They've got such a tight control. But, so far they've seen growth and sometimes control, and he's also been, criticized for Chechnya and his civil rights and human rights, but at the same time he's seen a lot of economic growth for Russia, and as we've said, a majority of people aren't seeing the rewards of that economic growth, but it's still substantial.
He's become fairly popular. To what?
Truly.
Okay, money helps make you popular. I've never been able to use that as a popularity tool myself, but money makes you popular. What else has he been able to do to increase his popularity?
Well, you got to look at the contrast between what Russia had before Putin and Putin right now. I mean, Boris Yeltsin drank a lot. He appeared to be very sloppy. Putin is the direct opposite. He's fit, he's in control, and he gives off this air of power. And, you know, for Russia, their entire history has been about who's going to bring them stability and for how long is it going to last. And if Putin promises, you know, even if it is more state control, promises some kind of stability for the average Russian, that's definitely going to increase his popularity.
You mentioned fit. I remember those buff photos of him.
Posing shirtless.
Yeah, posing shirtless, and obviously he had all his chest hair removed, and he looked pretty good. Do you think those photos were photoshopped, or think he really looks like that?
I think that was a publicity stunt. That was on a fishing trip of his, and he posed shirtless intentionally. I don't know, to show off what a great guy he is.
And now there's a calendar that
Oh,
shows him posing,
truly.
looking buff and stuff, which is interesting because he's kind of a short little guy. What about, I mean, it seems like it's a bad idea to be a critic of Putin.
I think you're right, and there's also the point of he has a lot of control as far as criticisms that he gets within his own nation. So it's interesting to me that Times has picked him globally to acknowledge. But yeah, I think there's significant fears of, at least within his own nation, of criticizing him.
Well, several people have already ended up dead for publicly speaking out against him.
Right.
Alexander Litvinenko, the former KGB spy who was poisoned and killed.
Then he was poisoned in London, right?
Yeah.
By nuclear stuff put into his food, which is a fairly evil way, and then he like died of cancer radiation poisoning.
Yeah, it's truly awkward that he's having this photo shoot, and it's almost accentuating the fact that he was once a KGB member, and he loves to participate in judo competitions. It's interesting to accent that part of his history at this point.
And there have been a couple of situations. He has, you know, for example, here's some interesting examples. This is from the Wall Street Journal of things that have happened to people who are critics. Here's a journalist who was denied, and she left the country, and then coming back was denied entry because she was said to have links to terrorism, and apparently all she did was write articles critical of financial deals. Another journalist, Ludmila Karlamova, who was also a political organizer, had a bunch of heroin planted in her possessions, and then she was arrested. And another reporter, Andrei Grekov, suffered a similar fate, although they planted bullets in his luggage. At least they didn't plant bullets in him. And then there's an investigative journalist, Anna Politkovskaya, I'm doing pretty good with these names, who was murdered on October 7, 2006, which is Putin's birthday, by the way. And there was a police investigation into this assassination, but of course they found no results whatsoever. Recently in a speech, Putin said, enemies of the state must be wiped out. Now it's interesting that a lot of people who travel to Russia and meet with Putin don't really talk much about this. You know, Nicolas Sarkozy went there. Do you think that they're over the energy barrel and can't really criticize too much?
I think
I mean, France would be one who's in favor of human rights, supposedly. So
I'm not really sure. I think it's my inclination to say that no, they're not. They're still legitimately concerned about their energy needs as we move forward.
So you don't want to You don't want to mess that up. Okay. What do you think about the Russians have, I mean, during the time of the Soviet Union was strong, a superpower, a major superpower, very important, you know, in confronting the West, et cetera, et cetera. And now since the fall of communism, it's fallen on hard times. And there's a lot of hard times. Life expectancies are low, and
I think you're right. The Soviet Union was definitely a kind of contrasting force to the U.S.'s democracy and whatnot, and they were very strong and resilient until their fall. And in the wake of the Soviet Union in 1991, the economy of Russia was obviously shot, but I think that today, still, Putin is kind of an anti-Bush symbol. He's not one that's going to sugarcoat things for us, and it's interesting that this year he's chosen as Person of the Year.
do you think he stands up to the West and the U.S. as a way to make political hay back home?
Well, it does. The rhetoric he uses in his speech is about restoring Russia's glory, and, you know, perhaps bringing Russia back, you know, into the modern age is definitely going to resonate with the people of Russia, but it's also going to make people a little wary on the outside of what he's actually going to do. There's been a conflict where President Bush proposed that we were going to install nuclear missile defenses in Poland, I believe, and Russia responded with restoring the flight patterns of their bomber jets that was in place of the Cold War. So they're definitely not taking any chances, and they're definitely showing that they're to be taken seriously.
Do you think that's politically popular back home?
I'd say it would be. You know, it's showing that Russia's strong and Russia can't be pushed around, and of course the people back home are going to like that.
Yeah, and some of the rhetoric's kind of extreme. He was like, he told the West to keep their snotty noses out of Russia's business, which is kind of an interesting characterization.
His blunt style is definitely a characteristic of Putin that's not going to jade things for us at all, and it keeps things exciting. I mean, the rhetoric they're using when they're talking about nuclear measures and not hesitating to use them certainly speaks pretty loudly of an aggressive behavior towards us.
Speaking about nuclear measures, Russia is helping sponsor Iran's nuclear program. Now, on the one side, that would be bad because they're sponsoring Iran's nuclear program. But on the other side, they say if Iran goes it alone, they'll reprocess their own uranium, and if Russia works with them, then they won't have the reprocessed uranium to make bombs. But I think it's made him pretty unpopular with the West in his cooperation with Iran. Do you think that's a wise policy on his part, or?
Well, we could take that for its face value and say that Putin is trying to help Iran with a nuclear program, but also eliminate any of the potential conflicts that would happen with depleted uranium. But if we look at the people who have helped Iran's nuclear program, I mean, Halliburton sold key nuclear technology to Iran. So let's not forget that if you back Iran, sometimes people don't always A, find out, or B, react in the way you might think.
Right, and A.Q. Khan, the Pakistani nuclear scientist, assisted Iran as well, and they're supposedly a U.S. ally. So it's hard to say that, you know, there's lots of blame to spread around. And who's to say that Iran doesn't get the right to peaceful nuclear energy, and there's no necessary connection? I mean, Iran has oil now, but their oil deposits are being depleted rapidly. In fact, there's a gasoline shortage in Iran because they don't have any refineries, so they actually have to import gasoline. So, you know, if I was the Iranian government, seeing that our oil reserves are going down drastically because they're selling it as fast as they can, you'd want nuclear power to produce electricity 20, 30 years from now, and it takes a long time to build nuclear power plants, and that's sort of Putin's argument as well.
It seems a little inefficient, as you point out, that they're shipping in oil to Iran
Yeah.
because of refineries difficulties. That it's not a good enough excuse. If we are facing an energy crisis, we need to have energy efficient measures installed, and energy efficiency is actually a theme in Russia right now. They show that even though their oil consumption is growing steadily through these past years, their energy savings and their energy savings awareness is going down, and truly is a problem for their production.
So you're saying that currently under Putin, Russia is wasting a lot of energy.
Yep. The energy efficiency measures are not adequate.
Yeah, and I understand that there's a subsidy too, so that
Truly.
oil's fairly cheap there,
Yep.
much more expensive, which is a way of keeping people quiet and satisfied. Do you? I guess the question would be: Vladimir Putin's the leader of Russia, and looks like he's going to continue to be in his role as prime minister. But I mean, would anybody else be any better? Maybe he's just a creature of the situation. And I mean, I just came back from the World Universities Debate Championships, and one of the topics that people were debating was, should we get rid of Putin? And the question is, who do you get to replace him? Right? His number two might be worse, and also a KGB agent. Or do you think there's a possibility for a democratic rebirth there? That's a tough question.
You got me there. I think
Okay.
that he's the best candidate as of yet.
Right, right. Well, I mean, here's an opinion piece by Gary Kasparov, who's one of the leaders of sort of the democratic movement. And he writes, ever since President Vladimir Putin took office 8 long years ago, the political and media leadership of the West have had a full-time job trying to look at the bright side of Russia. The free press has been demolished, elections are canceled and rigged, and then we hear how popular Mr. Putin is. Opposition marches are crushed, and we're told over and over how much better off Russians are today than the days of the Soviet Union, and then Time magazine names him as 2000 Person of the Year. Kasparov writes, unfortunately, there is no silver lining to Russia's descent into dictatorship. If anything, there is a look of iron to it. So maybe, you know, it's a return to an authoritarian governmental system that, like you say, people want stability. Okay, let me ask you this question. 15 years from now, will Vladimir Putin be looked on as a hero or a villain, having been the 2007 Person of the Year? And let's start with you, the Dean, Sam Ricker.
Well, after his, who knows how many terms as prime minister, I'd say that ultimately people will look at Vladimir Putin as a necessary evil.
Okay, all right. Taylor Lalemand.
I'd say, judging from his economic reform and his guidance of the economy, Russia's looking at a beneficial candidate, and they're looking at a bright future.
I think he may be able to buy popularity with oil revenue, but the fact that Russia's economy is not developing in a more sophisticated way means that at some point, you know, your dependence on extraction of natural resources is going to run out. And unless he can get it together to organize the country in a way that's not dependent on natural resources, I think he'll be looked at as someone who squandered a great wealth of natural resources and didn't prepare to do it better. So, long-term villain, short-term hero. But that's often what happens with politicians here on planet Earth. Thanks a lot for watching this week's edition of Flashpoint. Thanks to our panelists. Don't forget, think for yourself.